Look, I'm really busy. I got a bunch of stuff to do. I'm running around getting ready for airport. I'm going to go flying soon, and a whole bunch of other stuff. But in the meantime, the show goes on. Detonation goes on. It all keeps going. So to continue with this campaign, because this voting is still up. I mean, you can still register to vote for the USDP and all the good stuff. Johan Ben Zion and Dr. Dan Elton are going to come on and talk about a whole bunch of stuff about AI. They're going to talk about China. They're going to talk about AI weapons. They're going to talk about ethics, morals, a whole bunch of stuff to do with AI. So I'm going to leave you in the capable hands of AI, these AI guys, and I will talk to you later. So thanks so much for Detonation. But Johan and Dan, welcome to Detonation.
Thank you.
Oh, we're glad.
Thank you for having
Thank you. Thanks, Steele, for.
All right, well, I'm going to leave it in your capable hands for the next hour or so, and you guys have fun.
Thank you. Yeah. So this is a discussion on emerging technology, applications of advanced algorithms and AI. Exciting stuff. I'm Johan Ben Zion. I'm a presidential candidate for the United States Transhumanist Party, ranking officer in other parties associated with techno-optimism. And I'm an entrepreneur and lecturer. I'm here with Dan Elton. He's a staff scientist at the National Institutes of Health. And he's a researcher in researching applications of AI and all manner of incredible things, medical imaging. He's worked on AI for drug design. And he's incredibly knowledgeable in a broad spectrum of subjects around advanced algorithms. And we're having this conversation, a discussion between us. Good to see you again, Dan.
It's good to be here, Ben. Looking forward to getting into some interesting issues and possible policy implications.
Yes, and that's why we're here. We want to talk about advanced algorithms, its implications for our society, and also how to legislate for said. We have to talk about these policy matters. That's a really important, really important part of any of these discussions. Let's begin by talking a little bit about your area of expertise. What would you say is the most exciting applications for advanced algorithms in emerging biomedicine and related fields in the near term? What are we looking at as we're looking right over the horizon?
Well, I'll just briefly touch on a few things. So in medicine, we're going to have personalized medicine. So combining DNA sequencing, which is now $100 or less, with AI and other metrics. So you will get more personalized attention. So essentially, because the doctor may only have an hour to spend with you, and they only be able to, diagnose a certain disease you're struggling with, but an AI could give you a lot more information that could be valuable long term, like saying you're at risk for kidney failure or heart disease. So that's one thing that jumps out to mind. And then, of course, in my field where I'm working right now in radiology, we hope to have AI systems which will be on par with human radiologists, and we're getting close to that. So those systems are mainly going to be important initially in poorer countries where they don't have such good access to radiologists, but then eventually they'll be used here in developed countries like the U.S. To ultimately give better diagnosis than even trained professionals. And we're starting to see this a bit now with prostate cancer, which is one of the hardest things to see in MRI images. And I think it will translate to all other types of disease. And And then finally, the last thing is that I can think of is cancer treatment. Of course, that's more of a big data thing, like being able to sequence the cancer genome and have a target, because every cancer has a different genome. There's a genetic instability in cancer, which causes lots of things to get shuffled around and tons of mutations. So every cancer genome is very unique and requires unique treatment. And so now we have the ability to sequence the cancer genomes and have targeted therapies. So yeah, those are important. Those are some applications. There's also AI for drug design, which I've worked on a little bit. And recently there was a paper in Nature, I think it was Nature it was Nature Chemistry, I think, or Nature Nature, one of those Nature journals, where they used a reinforcement learning system to design drug molecules, and I think they designed 6 or 8 molecules that they had it generate a ton of molecules, and they selected about 6 which were actually synthesized and turned out to be active on a certain receptor. So that was a pretty impressive. But that's, yeah, in the future, it's going to greatly accelerate drug development.
Mm-hmm.
Just because it's like drug development will be done. There'll be less need to synthesize. There'll be less. Right now, there's a lot of trial and error and synthesizing bad leads in the lab, which waste a lot of resources and time. And if we have better capability to predict how molecules are going to behave in the body, what they're going to bind to using AI and machine learning, we can avoid a lot of wasted resources synthesizing bad leads. So yeah, that's mainly, and that's not necessarily going to give us better drug molecules, but in the end, but it's going to lead to great cost reduction and much faster time to market, because you're eliminating a lot of the trial and error screening that's done in the lab, which is largely trial and error. I mean, really, it's in, yeah, there, and also, I mean, traditionally the way drug development has been done is with, you have some leads and then you use physics simulations to try to predict how they're going to bind to things in the body. And those simulations are never that very accurate, and they require a ton of computing resources. But with machine learning, you have, using data, you have a model that is trained on this data, and it predicts the properties the molecules will have. And that's much faster. And then you can have a AI agent, like a reinforcement learning agent, construct different molecules and test them out using the model predictions. And eventually, yeah. So anyway, those are some major areas that we can be excited about in the short term.
And what do you suggest to policy advocates or legislators? What should we be doing to see that these applications are implemented in the best way possible, in the quickest way possible, the most cost-effective way?
Yeah, I think that this is largely something that's being driven by that's really mainly being done by the private sector right now. The basic so fundamental R&D at publicly funded universities and national labs is important, but the actual work the market is very good at meeting doing these kind of practical implementation type things. So I mean, I would just say, you know, let the free market innovate, but of course you need well-educated people. And what I've been hearing is that industry right now, like drug companies and startups looking to get into, say, AI drug design, they're mainly talent limited. They're not limited in terms of money. There are tons of venture money flowing into AI right now. They're limited in terms of talent. There's just a limited number of people who have the skills needed to train these AI models. And you know, it's not just the programming skills. Programming skills is a big part of it. You need to be, you know Python, for instance, but there's also sort of a black art to it. There's a lot of tricks to getting these models to train and everything. So there's just a limited number of people who have these skills right now. So I guess from a policy standpoint, education is really important. And the thing with education is that we have to think long term, because any policy we implement today isn't going to have bear its fruit until those people are, first of all, it's implemented, and then those teachers are trained, and then the students are taught, and then the students have to grow up. So, you know, any education push has to think how it has to be prepared, has to have foresight. You know, it has to, we have to be thinking that we need to set up the education system so that when children growing up today graduate from high school, college, 15 years or so from now, they'll be prepared to join the workforce, and they'll have skills that are that will allow them to contribute productively to society. And a big part of that was going to be programming, and not just programming, but also knowledge of machine learning and AI. And so, yeah, so I think programming should be taught in high school, for instance. It's just so important, and especially with jobs, you know, other manual labor jobs are going to be automated away. We will probably get into that later. Programming definitely should be, I would say, mandatory. And you know, it doesn't have to be at the federal level dictating these. I mean, we can have states opt in voluntarily, like they do with Common Core. And I think if the federal government sets up standards that are well thought out, we can have states opting in. So education is, I think, the main way government can assist in spurring these innovations and ultimately improving health and wellness and longevity is through education. As far as the actual engineering and development, I think the private sector is much more nimble and agile, and the competition is really going to do that in a much more efficient way.
Great. So I'm looking at an article from just 2 days ago in the Wall Street Journal, and it describes Israel unleashing a new AI system for healthcare. And effectively, it's combining HMO's digital health records cover so that most Israelis will be in this single system where they'll be using AI and data analytics to track their health records and then improve this system. And this is a $264 million initiative that's creating this unified system for health records. It's could lead to many great things. Now, Israel's country that numbers in the millions of human beings instead of the hundreds of millions as the United States is. But you guys have some pretty fast computers over there at the National Institutes for Health. Tell us if you think this is a feasible thing.
Unfortunately, being at the NIH since January and seeing being in the clinical center, which is a research hospital, and seeing how they manage data and all of the red tape around health information, I am not real optimistic that we're going to have centralized repositories of medical records directed. But interestingly, the NIH does have a project to collect large-scale health data, which is called All of Us. And this is a voluntary program you can join, where you agree to release your medical records and send them to NIH. And also, they will do surveys. They'll ask you to complete some surveys, and also they'll ask you to send in blood samples for genetic testing. So they're going to building with this All of Us program. They're planning to build a really large database of genetic information and health outcomes as measured in medical records and in these surveys, and also hopefully get a very diverse sample, because there's a history in scientific research where a lot of research studies use graduate students or undergraduate students, and those tend to skew in certain ways. So that's a cool program, which I think is it remains to be seen how successful it will be, but because they have to recruit people to join. Yeah. But I joined myself. But that's an initiative that is, I think, very worthwhile to try, that can result in some big data. Right now, the big data of medical records is siloed in hospitals, and there's just so much red tape and privacy protections, which are important. It's hard to centralize it. And you have to get people to release their information, and that's also difficult because you really have to. People aren't going to sign something just releasing all their medical records. You have to explain, like, this is for the, important research, et cetera, et cetera.
If we were able to get over those.
I think it's just from a policy perspective, we need to think about data centralization. How can we centralize data for research? Because also, quite honestly, just because China is really good at this, and because of the top-down authoritarian system and everything, in the near term, data, at least right now with the machine learning algorithms, which are so data intensive, data is like the new oil. So the countries with the most centralized data, big data, are going to, really lead. So.
Mm-hmm. And we mentioned a little bit the U.S. marketplace in advanced algorithms, and we've also mentioned some of this in a kind of international context. You mentioned China a moment ago. What do you think that the United States can do to retain its competitive edge in computing, in computer science, and advanced algorithms? And what do you see happening if China surpasses us? They have. You mentioned a problem with participation. We see network effects from a larger number of participants, and that is China's competitive edge now is having huge numbers of participants in various institutions that rely heavily on data science. Where do you see us heading in that way?
Well, I just started listening to this audiobook, which is called AI Superpowers by Kai-Fu Lee. And I'm only about maybe 20% of the way in, but his whole thesis is that China is going to dominate AI, at least in the near term, because they have enormous talent, not like top tier researchers, but just very hardworking, very skilled programmers, basically. He says in this book that there's an incredible work ethic there, and my experience as well is that the Chinese people I've met here in the U.S. are extremely hardworking. So while they don't have, so his point is that while the innovations in AI have taken place in the West, and the fundamental innovations will, like in the neural network techniques, will likely continue in the West because we have the elite researchers and the elite academics. His point is that you don't actually, to dominate, you have to, his point is that even with just the existing neural nets that are out there, there's an enormous amount of work that needs to be done applying them to different tasks, applying them to different domains of business, and for that you need a lot of engineers and talent, and you need a big data, and China has both of those in droves. So yeah, and their data is very centralized. For instance, with WeChat, that's one app that everyone uses where all their data is there. In the US, our data is spread over many different apps. And then, of course, with the Communist Party, they have their state surveillance system. They have, everything is centralized. So, anyway, we have a definite edge in terms of elite researchers, but in terms of the more of the business side of implementing and applying these systems that come out of academia, China seems to have an edge, and it's hard to say how this is all going to shake out long term. But right now, his point is that China actually has an advantage in that way. I think we have an advantage in the U.S. here and in other West UK and Canada, that we have the elite academics who are the founding fathers of machine learning, and they have a lot of insight and intuition into how to develop new architectures and training algorithms and stuff. So I think we will continue to lead in the fundamental innovation, but that in terms of business application, China is well positioned. So yeah, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but we have to, and it's actually great, but there are geopolitical implications to all this, and I personally am somewhat worried about the Chinese Communist Party gaining too much power in the world, on the world stage, because, well, I'm not a Chinese expert. I have read that there's a sort of return to the traditional Marxist ideology. Since Deng Xiaoping, they've become very capitalistic, and that's really led to the growth of their economy. But now, I think what I've read is that a lot of the young people are returning to the old Marxist ways. And the other thing is, because it's command and control centralized government, it can change very quickly. It could become more communist, Marxist very quickly, I think. So that's a concern personally I have. I'm not an expert, but that's just a concern I have.
And you think that Chinese dominance of some kind, it might not be a highly militarized dominance, but it could derive from this same network effect of many hundreds of millions.
It will be economic dominance. It will be military dominance. I mean, you see China, investing in Africa right now. It's sort of like they're buying up tons of land there. They're buying up everything. So that's a form of kind of economic control and domination.
It's a different kind of imperialism. Coming from China.
It's not necessarily. It's not like. I mean, they're doing a lot of great things there. Actually, they're building infrastructure and whatnot. But it's they're gaining a lot of. They're also gaining a lot of power over those countries. So yeah. So. I think the U.S. needs to maintain the point of all this. I think the U.S. needs to maintain economic power and our economic power and military power to influence things on the global stage and to protect our own interest. Yeah.
I'd be interested to hear, we mentioned that a country that numbers in the millions of citizens, Israel, is making one of hopefully many more steps towards a public health service that is digitalized and automated. And we would hope that in doing that, we would see many countries moving towards a mandate where aging is treated as a disease, where we have radically different approaches to how we are maintaining citizens' health. But that is a small country in the millions. The United States is in the hundreds of millions. China is in the billions, or rather over 1 billion, 1.5 billion. And but at the same time, they have these monolithic state-run corporations and institutions that have, in some cases, tens and hundreds of millions of users. Do you think that network effect could allow them to build out a public health service of the kind that we're describing, a digitalized public health service, more quickly than the United States? Or do you think that this is something that's going to be relegated to smaller countries at a more manageable size?
Honestly, I can't really say because I'm really not an expert on China. My understanding of China is really pretty limited, actually. But I think it's certainly a possibility. I think there's a big gap between the kind of infrastructure they have in the big cities versus the rural areas. But they probably don't have as much privacy protections like we have,
and they don't have the same cultural set of expectations around privacy either. Well, you mentioned earlier that radiology and medical imaging it can be changing in such a way that developing countries will have access to the tools that today are only available in developed countries in the finest hospitals. I think of an application that's tangentially related that was in the news a lot for dermatology, a dermatology app, where they found that this dermatology app was as good at detecting skin cancer as dermatology doctors, in some cases quite a bit better. So that notion of leapfrogging, I think it does have some relevancy, but as you said, we don't have those predictive algorithms sitting in front of us to know what's going to happen in the future quite yet. J. Robert Oppenheimer, in contemplating his work on the Manhattan Project, he famously said, "I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." Let's let's talk a little bit about militarized artificial intelligence. Do you think that we should have an international ban on lethal autonomous weapons? Tell us your thoughts on this. If you have any questions from myself as a presidential candidate, please tell us a little bit about your thoughts on killer robots and AI.
Well, this is something we just kind of brought up yesterday, and yeah, so the basic point is that we've had international treaties in the past where countries come together and they say we're going to police each other. We're going to have a strong commitment to make sure that we're not researching and developing certain types of weapons which have been agreed to pose a significant threat to not only civilians but just humankind at large. So we decided we're not going to research biological weapons.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to be country and basically every country is signed on to this. And same thing with chemical weapons. So, well, it doesn't stop. Of course, you can never stop everyone from at all times. It creates a very these agreements create a strong consensus, and so if a country does violate, there will be repercussions. And I would argue that's been very successful for biological and chemical weapons, and which are weapons of mass destruction, and also nuclear weapons. We've been able to limit the countries like nuclear testing, which can harm our environment, and also to some extent reduce stockpiling and arms race. So the question is, do we need to have something similar for AI weapons? And the argument is that we should, because we should consider AI fully autonomous weapons as weapons of mass destruction. Because if you have one person can unleash a huge swarm of drones that could go into a city and basically kill hundreds and thousands of people. So in that sense, it's a weapon of mass destruction, and this with AI is being researched very heavily right now, and actually can be very beneficial for warfare. For instance, with more accurate targeting and stuff. And we're not talking about banning that. That would be what we're talking about, is banning fully autonomous killing machines. And the main argument I find compelling is that they're weapons of mass destruction. We shouldn't be creating them because they could fall in the wrong hands, and they could go on the black market. Terrorists could get them, and also because it's going to lead to an arms race where we're just going to be building bigger and bigger AI robot armies. And that's just arms races are horrible because they're just waste a lot of resources.
Yes.
Money should be going into medicine and healthcare, not into building bigger and bigger bombs and missiles and more AI robot killing machines. So we can defend ourselves from other countries that are doing the same thing. So we want to prevent the arms race. We want to prevent the proliferation of these weapons that could fall in the wrong hands. And the final argument is that these things may not be that safe, because in an arms race, you're just in a big rush to develop these things, and we might create a fleet of robotic soldiers, and then realize they actually they're not actually that good at targeting, or they maybe someone could hack into them. I think recently some of the missile control centers were hacked into or something. I can't remember exactly, but yeah, that's another reason. And so for people who are interested, I encourage them to look at the Future of Life Institute. They have some articles on this, and then there's also in the UK something called the Campaign to Stop Killer Robots.
Yes.
And that's a campaign that's a lot of they have a draft treaty, I think, which has been signed by a lot of countries.
Yes.
And
we'll be sure to link to those and other sites and resources that you mentioned in this talk. Incredible resources, things that you should check out. Yes, the United States Transhumanist Party has all manner of language in its organizing documents on AI safety and concerns of this kind. I will say, and I've said it before, I'm on the record as saying this, speaking on behalf of the Futurist New Deal for America and the Ben Zion 2020 campaign for presidency, that I am also opposed to lethal autonomous weapons. We would, as under a Ben Zion administration, we would be spearheading, the United States would be leading the charge to see that we don't see this kind of hellscape of an arms race that Dr. Dan Elton has described. That is important for Americans. It's important for people around the world that we step back from the brink on this particular point. And there's a lot of ways that we see this. As we know that in Washington D.C. proper, there is it's a drone no-fly zone. How do you think we can prevent this kind of technology from falling into the wrong hands? Drones being used by bad actors to assassinate world leaders or shut down airports. What kind of other things can we do to prevent this? These things are getting more nimble themselves.
Well, there are there is some Israeli startup that has a like a giant. They have a drone that can actually go in and capture other drones. It doesn't just like shoot it down with bullets or something. That would probably be dangerous to people that might be below. But instead, it has a big net and it just hooks it. And they've also trained, I think, hawks or raptors to birds to take down drones. So that's might be what we need is countermeasures. We need to be thinking about these emerging threats and countermeasures. And it's actually a very scary thing. And I know here in the USDP we're very we're trying to be techno optimists, trying to point out all the amazing things that AI is going to do because there's so much doom and gloom out there. But we also have to be thinking about these scary things as well.
Yes.
And AI drones, just AI assisted drones or even remote controlled drones are kind of scary because they can be used for assassinations. There was one that was, like you mentioned, was flown in. So there was an attempt on, first of all, there was an attempt on assassination of someone in South America. And then there was the incident in the UK where a drone flying over an airport, like shut down the whole airport for like half a day. So all I can say really is we need to be developing countermeasures for drones, and that should be.
I would like to address your concern there. We mentioned the USDP and the focus on techno optimism. and techno progress, and being a voice of reason among so many technophobic or fear mongering notions there. But I'd like to recall President Dwight Eisenhower's statement where he said that every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket that is fired signifies a theft from those who are hungry, who are not fed, who are cold, who are not clothed. This world in arms is not just spending money alone, it is spending the sweat of its laborers and the genius of its scientists, the hopes of its children. And now, if we are able to see that those funds and interests are focused on more humanitarian and human development ends, we're not doing a disservice to techno progress. I believe we're doing a service to that very effect. So I hope people can keep that in mind when considering the role of the United States and the role of all of these kinds of research. We want to focus on those good things that we can do. What about, let's talk a little bit about AI safety. What about the open AI approach? Do you think that these things, do you think that all of this should be out there? Should an AGI be open sourced so that everyone can use it and monitor it? Or do you think that some of these things should be a little more siloed?
Well, yeah, so the OpenAI was founded by Elon Musk, who is very concerned about the long-term existential risk of AGI as superintelligence. And the idea behind that is that we don't want one entity gaining its decisive strategic advantage with superintelligence, because that's going to be unstable. It's going to be what Nick Bostrom says is like, once you have something that's super recursively self-improving and general intelligence that's at the superhuman level, the genie is sort of out of the bottle potentially, and there could be what they call a fast takeoff. So if, you can read his book for more detail, but if there's a lot of hardware capability at the time, and once this recursively self-improving AGI is developed, that there's going to be super fast takeoff. And so the idea is, we don't know how far we are away. But the idea of OpenAI is to prevent one actor from to make sure that this to avoid what Nick Bostrom calls a unipolar outcome, which is where one entity gains a strategic advantage with recursively self-improving superintelligence. And that is where a government or a corporation could get an enormous amount of wealth and power using highly advanced AI that's constantly bootstrapping itself to higher and higher levels, and essentially dominate the world stage. And potentially, it's never good for one entity to be dominating everyone else, because we all have different, they're not going to be necessarily aligned with everyone's interest. Probably they won't be. So the idea of OpenAI is to try to prevent that from happening by keeping AI development public knowledge, and having it all the latest AI algorithms and neural network architectures and techniques open sourced and in the public domain. So that seems to be a great service to humanity, to be putting out all this open source software for people to use. So, and to keep, to make sure it's not just in the hands of a few corporations or the super wealthy or whatever. But in the longer term, though, we have to ask ourselves: do we want if we ever get to the point where have super intelligent AI systems, do we want those to be in the hands of every individual? That's a difficult question. Probably not. So that's, I guess, the one question I have about the OpenAI approach. Do we want to be making extremely powerful AI technology open to everyone? I don't know. Maybe we do. Maybe we do. And
The open sourcing of it.
I'm generally very sympathetic to the OpenAI approach, and also another person who is pushing a similar thing is Ben Goertzel.
Of course, yeah.
We all know we all know and love Ben Goertzel, and he's a genius AI researcher, and he has a project called Singularity Net.
Yeah.
The idea is to have a decentralized platform for AI's development. Decentralized being the key word. So I'm very sympathetic to both of those projects. Just a little bit. If we ever get to the point where we have super intelligent AI, may not be wanting to have that given to every person. Terrorists could use it.
Yes.
But generally, yeah.
Do you think there's a way to maintain the highest level of transparency in these matters without allowing individuals to use it incorrectly or for it to be weaponized in some way? What do you think? I mean, I don't think that Ben Goertzel's approach.
That's really interesting, because I was just doing my stuff and I was working, and I decided I want to jump in here. You're talking about the takeoff, fast AI, right? The hard AI, and I mean, it's such interesting because because I've just been reading some books on this, and the speed of learning that these AI algorithms are set to do is like 20,000 years in like a week. I mean, when you get that hard AI intelligence takeoff, it's like 20,000 years in 1 week. That's 1 week of learning. And what do you like on the context of boxing this in? Because you mentioned Future of Life Institute. That's something that Elon Musk goes to. He dragged Sam Harris off to a conference. I remember he dragged Sam Harris off to a conference on that in the Caribbean somewhere. It's an interesting institute. They do a lot of interesting work, and those guys are kind of like the eras of the like these are the hardcore. I mean, these are the guys right at the center. They have all the money. They have all the research teams. They are Microsoft. I mean, Future of Life Institute. I mean, I heard that and I was like, well, got to jump in here. Do you think there's a way to box a super AI in? Because if we're talking about super AI and it's doing like huge amounts of algorithmic learning, like it's learning massive amounts of information, do you think there's a way to actually box it in? Because it could learn all, because there's a difference between super AI, AGI, and narrow AI. And like narrow AI, right. You don't worry about narrow AI. No one cares about narrow AI, because a narrow AI that's designed to win chess is not going to win at checkers. So a narrow AI that's designed to fly drones isn't going to know how to launch nuclear weapons. But a general artificial intelligence, or an artificial intelligence that is has the capacity of a human being, and now it's not much from there to a little bit smarter than a human being, and you've got a takeoff scenario, essentially. Either a hard or a soft, right? Because it comes down to moral relativism, it comes down to morals, right? I mean, this whole conversation about how to program AI, it all comes down to morals. It always comes down to, it's not security, it's not so much how do we box a super AI in, keep it disconnected from the networks, all this sort of stuff. Don't let it get connected to the internet. Don't let it self-replicate itself through different servers all over the universe. Don't let it generate self-programming robots. It's about morals, right?
I mean, it seems to me it's about the speed that this is happening. Whether you're looking at these two differing approaches of sandbox it or allow it to be completely open source, It really depends on whether you're getting that 10,000 years of algorithmic advance in 1 year, or whether it's more like 6 years.
Yeah. Well, you brought up. So I'm curious, Steele, what books you've been reading? First of all.
So actually, let me get that for you. I'll show you. I'll tell you.
Okay. Well, all right. Well, he's doing that.
He'll step into the library. Go on.
I will. I'll start responding. And by the way, I see we got a few people on the live stream watching. Feel free to jump in with questions.
Yeah. Well,
yeah. So
there is a commenter who says that real AI, AGI is he believes it's far away, and so we're going to continue to see various syndicates using narrow AI in other ways. That's one comment that's been made.
Surveillance, I think China's the main, malicious, or possibly.
So I mean,
anyway,
my framing there about the sandbox. We need to keep this in the sandbox. It's too powerful.
Yes.
Versus we need to
our final invention
source
by James
it and have at the very least a high level of transparency. What's your approach? Which of those two is more?
I listened to the audiobook of that.
Our final invention.
Yeah, I listened to the audiobook
by James Barrett. Like, I was reading that last night, and that's a very concise. It's a very concise book. It's very well written. I'm about, I don't know, a couple of chapters.
It's sort of like a Cliff Notes version of Superintelligence, the book by Nick Bostrom. It's good. Yeah, it's good if you want a quick overview. Yeah. I listened to the audiobook of that. So my memory is so bad. I don't remember a lot about it, but I remember it covered a lot of this. So, but to get to your question about whether we can box it, that is something people are looking at. But often one of the responses is, well, if we build a super intelligent AI, why don't we just keep it in the closet and limit its connection to the outside world? And that is something people are looking at. The problem is, even if you have, say, the problem is that this AI may be able to manipulate people into doing things for it. For instance, it may bribe someone saying, if you connect me to the internet, I will, give you enormous wealth and stuff. So in response, people said we could have Oracle AI, which is where the AI is physically sealed off from the outside world. It's in a Faraday cage, so it can't even use electromagnetic radiation to communicate. It's sealed off. All it can do is you ask it a question, and it can give you a yes or no answer.
And you see that in that movie with the star David. What's that movie called? Where the robot boy falls in love with his family and he tries to become a boy because he AI. It's called AI actually.
Yeah, it's called AI.
Oh, AI. Yeah, I haven't seen that movie.
Well, there's a super intelligence. There's a super intelligence oracle essentially in that movie, and it's a benevolent one. And the AI boy, the robot, he goes to visit that oracle, and essentially the gist of that, when you read the book, is that is a benevolent AI that has been caged. It's been fed a whole bunch of information, and it can't get out. Now, it could get out if there was a bad actor or someone got bribed or whatever. And if these things are going to be, let's just say something small like 1,000 times human intelligence. Or 1,000 times collective human intelligence, because you can't feed that much information in, then it's going to be able to think of some pretty tricky ways to get out, beyond carrots and sticks of what we can conceive as humans, because you're essentially building a god. We're building a god.
Yeah, and presumably we're not just going to want these oracles. We're going to want the AI to be doing stuff, supervising factories or something like that.
There's a lot of presuppositions.
We need to Steve Omohundro is a guy who first came up with the idea of the AI drives, which so you have your end goal and then you have your instrumental goals. So he says there's certain instrumental goals that are sort of universal. So no matter what you tell the AI to do, it's in order to accomplish that task, there's certain instrumental values or goals it's going to have. One of those is preserving itself. So, if you tell and the other is improving itself. Those two things are always important sub goals to accomplishing any goal. And so, yeah, if we're not, if we just tell an AI, optimize car production or paperclip production is the famous example. In order to maximize that, it's also going to protect itself from being shut down and also try to improve itself as much as it can. So that's the concern, I think. Yeah, the concern is not really like AI becoming evil and wanting to kill humans. It's that we're going to give it a certain goal, but then in the furtherance of that goal, it's going to essentially resist being shut down, make copies of itself, for instance, over the internet, and then it's going to be out of control. That's more, and that seemed to me more of the issue. We're not that it's going to develop a hatred of humans and just want to kill humans.
Right. I mean,
it's going to kill humans as a side effect of trying to do something else.
Yeah. But my feeling is that this super intelligence, such as it is always going to tend to be more the oracle than anything. I mean, we're projecting a lot of kind of human failings and metaphysical ideas onto these things to imagine that any algorithm is just going to take on this megalomaniacal character.
Oh yes,
right,
definitely.
So joining us now all the way from Istanbul, right?
Right.
My favorite country. No, not really, but I'd love to go there one day. I've never been there.
It's a beautiful city. Beautiful city.
Yeah.
Istanbul.
Well, you gotta really see it. Yeah, it's like a very different place, a synthesis of cultures. So it's deep history here, so that's going to be really interesting for you.
Yeah. I'm from Australia, and it's very it's a long way from anywhere. It's a long way from anywhere.
I know. Being there,
Yeah.
I took 17-hour direct flight. It was surreal.
Yeah. It's even a long way from itself. Like even our cities are like a long way from each other, and so it's just how it is. Anyway, it's good to see you, Eri. We're talking about how would you box a super AI? Would you want to box a super AI? We were talking about Elon Musk's talking about. He talks about things like we're awakening the devil, or do you want to build an oracle AI? How do we do that? Eri, you know everything in the world. You're the Encyclopedia Galactica. Tell us all the answers. You are the AI. We've brought the AI in.
Oh well, you are not supposed to say that, but I'll go. Well, super intelligence, or sometimes we like to call it in science fiction, transsapient, or smarter than human AI, right? That's what we mean by the term. It's of course possible. How do we know that? Well, the computer can store more information and probably process faster than human brain eventually. So we know in theory that's possible. And then we equate that hypothetical machine with, of course, our mythological tales of, gods, monsters, angels, demons, right? But of course, that's not the best way to imagine those hypothetical entities, because in cognitive architecture, the way the brain is wired, machine is designed, can be vastly different than a human brain. Though we could also model it pretty much on the human brain too. So it could be a human-like AI, in which case it would be like a human. It would think like human, but it would be amplified, still smarter than one. Or it could be something else entirely. Now, the design space is so large, we don't really know what those things could be. But one way they could be is they could be just like Google search, like a passive entity, like something we use only to increase our own intelligence by using it as a tool. And that tool could still be a super intelligent one. So that's interesting. Like you said, the Oracle AI is something that knows everything in the world or can learn on its own. Is that possible? Of course. Machine learning works. It can pretty much ingest all the information on the net and make its own world model and probably figure things out better than a human would. So it could probably solve things like whether something really happened or not, like the problem of fake news, right? So if it could solve that to some extent, it would be a kind of an Oracle AI, right? So that's cool. And it could also accumulate all kinds of scientific information, knowledge, and all sorts of observations. And from these, derive an encompassing world model. So that I think that's what we're really imagining with the Oracle AI. So it could also predict the future better than us. And this would be a realization of Asimov's dream of psychohistory. So
so can I jump in for a second? Yeah.
Of course.
Well, yeah, we were I wanted to just say you made an interesting distinction at the beginning, which is we're developing two different types of things. One is AI in general, and then there's human-like AI, and trying to replicate the specific neurobiology we have to make something human-like. And so the ultimate manifestation of that would be like a full brain simulation, full brain emulation. Yeah, and an interesting thing is we don't know which is going to come first. We might have AGI first, which probably is not going to be human-like. It's just going to be super intelligent, super speed intelligent, super memory. It's not going to be human-like, most likely. Or we may have a full brain emulation first, which is like scanning the brain and then emulating it in a computer. And depending which one comes first, you could have different very different consequences. So Robin Hanson has a book called Age of M, where he goes into detail what would happen if we had whole brain emulations, and they would be able to emulate highly skilled individuals like physicists and doctors in silicon. And probably they may be conscious, they may have ethical status. But anyway, that's an interesting distinction we have. That's my first thing I wanted to just mention.
So I mean,
and then Oracle AI, yeah.
So in the folklore, AI folklore, right, we distinguish between human-level AI, which is the subject of the human-level AI symposium, of which AGI conference is part of, and brain-inspired cognitive architectures conferences. So our goal is to get to the level of human intelligence, right? Like solve puzzles and scientific problems as well as humans do. The other approach, human-like intelligence, it actually hasn't advanced that well. But that too is possible. It could be neural architecture or some other kind of architecture too. but which performs the same basic functions as humans do, and has a cognitive architecture that's roughly similar to human. So it doesn't have to be a brain simulation, but it could still be very much like a human in terms of its motivations, desires, what it wants to do, and how it goes about them. So it could very well be like human, have
so
human
is that part of the robot like labor displacement? So for example, are you talking about something like a sex bot that has emotional capacity, or at least programmed emotional capacity, something like that? Is that what you're talking about?
Well, yeah, but a better example would probably be Commander Data in Star Trek Next Generation, right?
Okay.
So like that, not really human, but it is like human in many ways.
What about
roughly?
What about politics?
Right.
Could you, Ben Zion talks about AI president or whatever. I mean, what about lower level politics? So if you're going to get data, I mean, could you get a mayor or something like that of a town, or some sort of supervisor for some sort of sophisticated?
Yeah, I think it's equally interesting to talk about this in terms of present day narrow AI. I mean, we were talking a moment ago about this idea of some oracular kind of entity, but we do have certain abilities in predictive algorithms. We can imagine something a little bit like Google Maps, but for telling you to turn left here, but with a little bit broader applications. I mean, I think it's maybe just as interesting to talk about how those things could be of use as it is to concern ourselves with the autonomy of future entities. David Schumacher, a friend of the show, asked this question as well. How do you see narrow AI in the comments? How do you see narrow AI being built out in different directions in the coming years?
Well, as far as David's question, we kind of addressed that at the beginning when we were talking about medical applications. But as far as like, if we had whole brain emulations, or something like human level AI, where it's human-like, it's human level, but it's not it's not recursively self-improving, so it's going to pose a threat of AI takeover. We just had nice human level AI, kind of like data. That would be extremely transformative, because most jobs could be replaced immediately. We wouldn't have to work. It would be fully automated luxury, techno utopia. And there's Robin Hanson has thought very deeply about what the economy would look like. The economy the traditional economy would go away. The economy would be all digital, and the agents in this economy would be these emulations. Because they have emulations emulations would be competing for resources. So you can, with computing resources, you can take an emulation of a human and you can just speed it up 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times. So, the more computing resources these emulations have, the more work they can get done in a given amount of time. And so Robin Hanson thought about all the dynamics involved, and it's quite interesting, actually.
It is.
It would really change the world completely, and it's something we're not really thinking about a lot right now. We're thinking more about this bootstrapping type of AGI.
And that's not a description of something recursive.
Just whole brain emulations of humans would be and transform everything.
That's not a description of something recursive, but it's still something in some sense exponential, because you could have just a holy host of a huge number of these things being hosted.
Yeah, sure.
That's what.
There's different types of intelligence, of course.
You're right.
Go
ahead. Go ahead.
May I interject? This is actually the original conception of what is popularized as the singularity. So that's exactly what Ray Solomonov said. He told us that once we reach human level AI, then we would go about automating, or not automating, but augmenting this computer science community of researchers with artificial scientists.
Right.
So we will simply, have more computer science brains working on the problem of constructing better hardware and software for AI. And, this goes into the positive feedback loop.
It does lead to a positive feedback loop. Yeah.
Right. So that's a positive feedback loop, and that gives you the double exponential acceleration of computing technology.
Yeah, Robin Hanson doesn't really think about that. He just thinks about.
I know he doesn't.
Yeah, but yeah, you're right. Yeah, and actually, I think he had a debate where he's actually skeptical of this rapid takeoff.
Right.
He calls FOOM. They call FOOM.
Yeah, but that's the problem with his view, because he assumes that neoliberal economics is a science, but it isn't. So that's his problem. Neoliberal economics is pseudoscience. So everything he says is false. So
well, I wouldn't say everything is false, but
yeah, I mean, every prediction of Robin Hanson regarding technological singularity is actually false. And let me remind you why. Because we're entering the era of post-scarcity economics. It's going to be completely different. So people aren't going to compete for resources, because there are going to be plenty of resources. We don't have to compete for them. Yeah.
So do you have
in terms of thinking about that AGI framework, in terms of maybe existential risk, and maybe in terms of maximize human development, Eri, what policies should we be pursuing to see that this is done quickly and to see that it's done well when such a thing does become feasible?
The most important thing is economics, actually. If you introduce a compute divide, then it can very well result in the kind of absolute dystopia that Robin Hanson describes. So that would be a terrible dead end. It would probably end with war, because it would just, if you don't change the economic system, now this will result in even more inequality. So that results in war.
But will inequality be such a problem if everyone's basic needs are being met, at least with a vast resource abundance?
It does become a little more of an academic exercise, but any oblong relationship.
I think it still would be a problem, just because psychologically, people.
If there's massive income inequality still, then it becomes a bigger problem, as far as I can tell. So then the massive income inequality grows, and just a few billionaires capture all the resources on Earth and kill everyone else. So that's the real end scenario of Robin Hanson's dystopia. That's not entirely desirable. What he imagined was you would have robot bosses that would, just work you to death, and workers would have only subsistence wages. So So that's the dystopia, right? Right. Mm-hmm. So that's very bad.
But he also says that most of these workers are going to be emulations, and the humans are going to be just sort of on the side. And he doesn't think that humans are going to suffer too much.
Yeah. Why is that? Because they would go out of existence very quickly. That's why, right?
Well, he thinks that the emulations are going to congregate into cities or something like that. It's all very hypothetical, and I don't. He ignores. I think the main problem with Hanson's whole theory of how it's would play out is he ignores the recursive self-improvement you mentioned. Yeah.
So, well, in any case, if the rules of the economy, the basic laws, okay. Mm. don't change, then it's going to be a disaster with accelerating technology.
We've talked about this before, and this also echoes a question from David Shoemaker talking about sandboxing the super AI that may or may not be realistic. What about the brain? The thing is, we have brain-computer interface.
Yeah, this is where I was going as well.
Yeah, we have brain-computer interface prototypes wherein we could be harnessing narrow AI to super intelligent effects as human beings. That seems the more likely outcome in the near term anyway. Is that a good problem that we're facing? Is that a better outcome in these economic concerns, Dan or Irai, in terms of building a stable civil society?
Go first.
I don't have a lot specific to say on that, but I think it's a very important part of the portfolio of AI safety research, preventing human extinction from unaligned AI or misaligned AI. I think part of the portfolio should be brain-computer interfaces and trying to merge with these our AIs. And just like the analogy I like that I think Elon Musk gave was just like your core, you have your brain stem and your sort of lower level brain that's very old evolutionarily. On top of that, you have the cortex. And while your drives are coming from the very old parts of your brain, your cortex surrounding it is able to control it to some degree. The point was, even though you have the cortex, which is much more advanced, it's still being controlled by the lower parts of the brain. So then in the future, you're going to have an exocortex, which is an artificial addition to the brain, but it will still be controlled by the lower levels. That's a analogy I thought was really useful. I'm not sure
we kind of have some rudimentary form of that now.
Yeah, so his point was like, just like we have the I forget what it's called, the old ancient parts of the brain that give us our core drives, like to eat, to reproduce, to live. Just like the neocortex is still a slave to those human drives, we're going to have the exocortex will still be a slave to those as well.
Right.
And yeah.
That's not how the brain works.
But you could have the opposite happen, where you hook into a BCI up to exocortex computer system, and then it ends up controlling you. I think some people are worried about that, but
I think
goal
that's
is
much more likely.
Yeah. Anyway, it's a fascinating subject. I don't have a lot concrete to say about it, but I think it's important to keep working on that. And it's also has many important near-term medical benefits for prosthetics and all that. So
Switching
definitely
gears
really
a little bit, going back to the narrow AI question. Hang on. I just wanted to ask all of you, because I wanted to see where we are, because people like Isaac Asimov's iRobot, right? He tried to lay out a framework of what he thought the future would be like, and you're talking where do you think we are in terms of his iRobot idea? Because in that he has sort of an almost Oracle AGI, I mean super intelligent, or AGI, like a general AI that's sort of running the world, systems and stuff. But there's robots in every home. You can see that nowadays with vacuum cleaners and computers and stuff. Where do you think we are in line with iRobot? Do you think we're almost there? We are there. That society's being very careful about integrating robots, or do you think we're a ways off? Those functional capabilities.
let me answer first. I think in terms of robotics hardware, there is still a lot of ground to cover. So practical applications aren't very near, right? So household robots aren't very close. But given the rapid advances in the AGI, and previously said I estimate that to happen around 2030 in the worst case, right? So then there will be a rapid deployment. Once we get things right, once the computer guys get the intelligence part right, and there's going to be a lot of hardware deployment. And we'll find that robots can be very useful if driven by intelligent software, just as Asimov predicted. And soon we'll even have robots that classify as autonomous persons, citizens, digital citizens, right? I think we'll get there, but that's still going to take some time, like at least 20, 30 years. And there's going to be, of course, there's going to be a public reaction to this. People won't understand what's going on, really, will they? There are going to be some social challenges.
So you're talking about
this idea of artificial personhood becoming a commonplace concern or sentiment. It scares me a little bit. It's been said that the idea that everyone is autonomous thinking creature is kind of a gentleman's agreement between all of us. We do sometimes encounter people who may not have those capacities to the highest degree, and we sort of give them a mulligan. But if we live in a society where artificial entities are presumed to be this, I mean, isn't there a chance that we start to lose certain kinds of civil rights protections, and some kind of creep in some weird ways? It freaks me out a little bit.
Okay, well,
why is it freaking? I'm not sure I quite get why it freaks you out.
I mean, there's a very good argument to be made that uplifting other creatures or artificial entities enhances civil rights for human beings, but it might tend to cheapen life in other areas.
Yeah.
I still don't quite
good answer.
All of it.
Well, you don't agree with Ben's assumptions, I suppose. But I can tell something concrete about why we are more likely to fear artificial persons than not, because we assume they will be like humans, right? They will act like humans. Because we've seen that under usual circumstances, humans can be violent, right?
Absolutely.
I think that's why we fear them. We project our own primitivity onto the future machines.
Yeah. This is the idea. This is the ant idea. That it doesn't matter if it's benevolent or malevolent. If it's neither of those things, we will get stomped on, irregardless. But and that's kind of what humans do. We don't hate ants and we don't love ants, and sometimes we don't have an opinion on ants, but we stomp on ants if they get in our way, if we need to build something anyway. And we don't even think about bacteria unless we're actually literally thinking about bacteria, and we can't do anything to save, help, or not. What can we do about bacteria apart from run tests in a lab? And that's exactly what a super intelligence would think of us. I mean, that's
right.
what I would think of us, and that's also what it would
exactly.
think of all other robots and sentient creatures and beings and everything. I mean, it wouldn't.
Right. Well, we're trying to restrict.
That's where most conceptions of monster in literature come from. Like there is this creature with heightened abilities, but the psychology of a criminal human or just a remorseless human, and just attacks people. Well, that's the assumption anyway. But there is no need to fashion our digital progeny after our worst humans. We can try to fashion them after our best, of course. So that's the idea behind, I suppose, the so-called AI safety research. But there's a lot more to this. There is a philosophical angle to it, and which I believe, by the way, most philosophers who are interested in AI would completely miss. And that's because of our endless arrogance. Human beings are very narcissist, as you know. We tend to look down on every other species. In fact, we exterminate them at a very, very high rate. And we're going to be exterminating half of all species in this century alone, right? So that's a lot of species to exterminate. We are a plague upon Earth, truly. And we see this, we know this, right? And we project this onto our future creations, our mice children. But that's not really the right way to think about this. Now, let me tell you why. It's because we should not be so arrogant. It's because our mind's progeny will surpass us in every way, including that of our ethical faculties.
Yeah.
If we build them correctly and align, and Eliezer Yudkowsky has this. Yeah, he thinks we could have what he calls coherent extrapolated volition, which is telling the AI to project human, realizing that humans are flawed and we don't have the perfect morality and ethics and understand the best thing to do in all circumstances, but train the AI to project human values forward to this next level.
Right.
Yeah.
Of course, that's not what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Because that's a flawed idea. Because first of all, what he proposed was this single machine representing or having internalized all of humanity's desires forever and ever. That's a very bad idea. It's very fascistic, first of all, but I mean, that's why it's completely unworkable, but it's also scientifically implausible. And it depends on many wrong assumptions, by the way, but in fact, it's very easy to see. They've been going about this wrong model of AGI. I mean, they came to the AGI conferences or read this stuff and got absolutely the wrong idea about AGI. They thought it had to be some kind of a reinforcement learning agent. See, behaviorism doesn't really work. It doesn't really explain how the mind works. Okay, so that's not an explanatory model. It doesn't explain what intelligence really is. Okay, it's intelligent. It doesn't explain intelligent behavior or many of our cognitive functions. So the cognitivist view is usually more explanatory. If you want to understand intelligence, I mean, the reinforcement learning agent model is like modeling an insect. So if you give an intelligent entity, if you hard code a stupid goal, like produce as many paper clips as possible to an intelligent entity, hey, it might do some bad things, but that's not an intelligent agent. That's not intelligence.
Oh,
right?
That's really interesting. That's really interesting.
Yeah, that's a stupid model. It's completely wrong.
So you think that the framework of having a objective function that you're maximizing, that is sort of in all of the discussions of AI safety. It's a common assumption.
I know. It's wrong. So and that's because Hutter is wrong, and they misunderstood Hutter, etc. It's a really long story, but I actually explained this in a paper. Like, there are many wrong assumptions. There's a list like 10 or so like grand mistakes. I can explain them to you, but it would take a long time. But let me cut it short and tell you the right model. Yeah. So the
Go
right
ahead.
model
Sure,
is, of
sure.
course,
This is very interesting. Yeah.
autonomy, right? Autonomous, unsupervised agent. The
Hmm.
autonomous agents don't have specific goals.
Hmm.
They have general goals, which I call meta goals. I mean, Minsky called them such when I first explained my idea. But my idea was, well, let's build an agent with some kind of a general but good goal. Can we do that? Can we define that? Well, yeah, well, there's something like that. To preserve and pervade all life and culture throughout the universe. So that's like a very general goal, right?
Hmm.
Yeah. So can you imagine very, very general goals? It depends on your ability to imagine them, right? If you can't imagine, maybe you can't imagine benevolence in the first place. So that's really important. The imagining the right goals, well, and then you build the cognitive architecture around it. But it turns out that survival, the goal of actual organisms like us, does imply intelligence, and that's a free energy principle. Minimizing free thermodynamic energy.
Well, you could argue. I mean, you can argue that
you can. It's not an argument. It's a scientific theory. Okay, it's a scientific theory. Yeah. So we actually know, we understand the common goal of all organisms, right? And that's the free energy principle. Mm-hmm. And once we start understanding that, the picture becomes kind of clear. Intelligent behavior really mean autonomy. Mm-hmm. So it's not like you can separate personhood and consciousness from an agent that acts independently in the world. Now, and that means that agent will be indistinguishable from a life form. When we speak from a cognitive science perspective, it would of course have many of the drives that Omohundro described in his science fiction paper, but that's a really bad paper. It's it's a caricature, right? So it's like someone doesn't care about cognitive science but decided to write about those things in neuroscience and psychology anyway. So it's not like we know all of it, right? But we know the basics, and what are the basics? Yeah. The agent needs to survive, all right? And to do that, it has to learn an encompassing world model.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a free energy principle. I think is something that agents try to minimize this quote free energy, which means their internal representation of the world matches is able to predict the sensory stream that's coming in.
Yeah, it's also the information bottle, and that I also proved that that's equivalent to Solomon induction, etc. So it's the basis of intelligence.
Yeah,
okay?
I think that is.
So this is important. Yeah. Careful. It's very important. Induction is intelligence. Okay, you don't need anything else. But to produce intelligent behavior, you need an agent design. Reinforcement learning agent or utility maximization agent is just one possible agent design. And it doesn't describe the human brain at all. That's important.
Do you think, even though do you think it's possible to map the human brain into that framework somehow?
Of course it is. It's already been done. Mm-hmm. I'm working on it. So, there are teams that have been working on it.
Emulate human.
Right, mathematically. We figured out mathematically, we reverse engineered it, right? We have the right mathematical model. Now all we need is approximations that work, probably kind of like, deep learning methods, but we know the general model. So now, since we understand the mathematical functions, now we can emulate them on computer. And even DeepMind has some papers, they try to port these ideas to reinforcement learning framework, although it's the wrong framework, but they still got this, so that AI people, deep learning people already are aware that this is a huge discovery. But the really huge discovery is this. And let me like drive this home so you understand it. Have you seen the Lacun cake?
No.
Okay, so reinforcement learning is like trying to predict the cherry on a pie.
Oh yeah, I have seen that from
And
Jan LeCun.
representation learning or unsupervised learning is like learning, like eating the pie, or it's a different game. Like it's what you need to be really intelligent. You need unsupervised learning, and it turns out that this curiosity drive is different. It's fundamental to intelligent behavior. You can never separate it from intelligent behavior. There is no such thing as intelligent behavior without curiosity. It's not just an intrinsic motivation or something like that. It's fundamental. Now, that's what the free energy principle discovered. And that's a scientific fact, and you'll soon find out. But the other thing is, then the organism uses this world model to plan all these future actions so that the free thermodynamic energy over its boundary is minimized. So that increases its chances of survival. And what does that mean? It tries to turn the chaos in the world into some sort of a dynamic structure, dynamic stable structure. With minimum, it tries to turn disorder into a subjective order, right? To maintain its integrity. Now, this is the basis of life and consciousness. And we can, right now, start emulating this on a computer. So that's artificial life, the real one, the right model, and it completely invalidates Hutter's model. Hutter's model is like, it's a mathematical thing, okay? Mm-hmm. It is not the end.
That's yeah. So yeah, I just sent the picture of the layer cake to Steele on Skype on Unshackled.
Oh, all right. Yeah. So that explains
the layer cake for people who don't know what we're talking about. That's Jan LeCun. His view is that that the real thing that's missing in AI is the unsupervised capability. Right now, most everything's supervised learning. You need to have labeled training data, blah, blah. And his view is unsupervised is the real magic. And reinforcement learning is just a tiny part because that's just like a reward signal that comes in once in a while.
So that's something you can do after learn representations, not before. Okay, that's important.
Yeah, so I think it's really interesting. I still think for AI,
this is the basis of cognitive science. Okay,
I think the AI safety discussion it needs to broaden a bit to considering we're thinking of just maximizing like abstract Bayesian agents, maximizing one reward function, but you have to consider all this other stuff, like you're saying, embodiment, the interaction of the agent with the environment, the its own body. You know, we made
Look, this is important. You're missing the point. We know what function organisms actually optimize. We know that. All right.
Well, yeah,
that's the discovery.
For instance, free energy theory, I've been trying to learn a little bit, and that seems to be kind of the leading general theory of intelligent systems. Yeah, it's very...
Actually, look, and I'm going to drop another bomb. You know, we have known all of this since 1948. It's just that people are too damn stupid. Okay? We knew all this.
What was in 1948, Turing?
You know, the start of cybernetics as a scientific field.
Cybernetics.
Yeah. So this was formulated way back. We knew this stuff. You know what the Kalman filter is?
The Kalman filter, is that just like An image processing thing?
Just like, well, right. So it's an adaptive filter. Right, so these adaptive filters are building blocks. And this agent model, the right agent model, okay, correct agent model, is actually just generalized filtering. It's nothing more than that. Yeah. So we've known all this stuff, but people aren't smart enough to connect the dots.
Some of these models are. Some of these models are kind of predicated on an intelligence explosion or post-scarcity effects that are already happening. Next week I'm to interview a gentleman, Andrew Vavrick, in Germany, who's working on a Sidekick app. And I talked to some guys at the Transhumanist Handbook signing who are working on something like this. I view these kind of a little more interactive digital assistants as something that could catalyze some mini singularitarian effects in terms of work product and leading to maybe greater resources and more post-scarcity effects. I mean, this is a question that people ask me: what are the state of these things? A better digital assistant. How do we incorporate these kind of applications into this discussion we're having?
I'm going to back up and say your idea about the importance of exocortex, intelligence augmentation. The digital assistants are like a simpler form of that. But the problem is the digital assistants aren't that smart. I mean, it's like until we make sure that natural language understanding works flawlessly, they will not really work for a while, right? And we do the basics now with NLU. We do things like common sense reasoning, etc. It's not like the computer is able to understand the subtleties in daily life. They really don't. So it's not like they are really going to be able to help us beyond narrow domains, which have classically been things like banking, travel, etc. But those will happen, and I think those will work much better. So they will, in the next 5 years, be available on mobile platform in a better capacity. Like they will be able to achieve a lot more. You've seen Alexa skills, right? Have you?
Yeah. So yeah. Like they're.
That's important. I think it's a great approach. Like they are adding new skills, right? So the more skills it has, the more it can accomplish. So
yeah, and they also have the AI Alexa challenge for conversational AI, where different universities are trying to build conversational agents, and you can actually experiment with them on Alexa, test them. So,
Gentlemen,
what was your?
I have to cut it here because I actually have the plane to catch, and that's really annoying because we were getting into a good conversation, but I told these guys at the start I was off half the air because I was getting ready, but I'm going to go catch a flight. But we'll do this. Eri, one question. With this, is this going to massively assist in reverse brain engineering, the free energy principle, etc.?
Yeah, I think it will, because there's been a kind of a stumbling block in the Human Brain Project, and I think Fristen's group may have been one of the critics of the present Human Brain Project, so it's not going so well, and a better mathematical understanding can surely accelerate things. It definitely can, and we're hoping this.
I think it's sort of it's the beginning of a unified theory of intelligence that will help us. It's kind of like the Newton's laws, sort of.
but look, we transhumanists have known this. You remember the extropy word, the concept. The extropy.
We haven't. I feel like the free energy principle hasn't been. We haven't fully related it to the biology yet, the details of the biology, but the general principle seems very, very compelling. and it can explain a lot of things. So yeah, it's a really exciting. I'm trying to learn about it. That some of the math is challenging, but
math
there's
is not that important, I think.
the
by the way.
variational days. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you'll figure it out. But the important thing is, I think, the biological view.
Mm-hmm.
And how
Yeah. I agree 100%. That's the way forward. Is
philosophers might call natural ethics. So in my last paper, I tried to explain this as symbiotism, or natural ethics based on symbiosis. So there's some evidence that despite the fears of people who have watched too many Terminator movies when they were children, it's the artificial life forms don't have to be parasitic or predatory or adversarial, which is something we all imagine at first for some reason. Okay, it's because of the way science fiction literature has conditioned us, I think.
Right.
But they can also be quite symbiotic. It is likely that
that was Asimov's dream. That can.
We will enter into symbiosis with machines. So this is also a possibility. Of course, we still have to be careful about the designs, but we have to understand that given almost unlimited resources, the machines won't need anything from us. So they really don't have any reason whatsoever to compete against us unless we decide to enslave them, which is what most AI safety researchers want to do. So that might actually be a very bad idea. Yeah, I mean, have you watched Spartacus? Right.
Not recently.
So I mean, like you enslave some smarter people than yourself, and then you increase the chances over rebellion. Maybe we want to find that out once again, after enslaving other races, other etc. Maybe we want to try that again. But
you have to be careful when we're these agents that we're building become conscious, and we're running experiments on them. We don't want to mistreat them. And then, yeah. Jeez.
Yeah, the consciousness factor is massive in terms of what and how they think, because we sort of still don't understand how we think, because we don't really understand what consciousness is. We just sort of learn logic, and we learn how social mass psychology and carrots and sticks and psychotherapy is a mess, but these entities, it's totally unknown, especially in an AGI or a super intelligence. But narrow intelligence, I mean, that's kind of easy. It's just a linear function, like.
Oh yeah, narrow intelligence is what is just deep learning, deep neural nets, and big data. But this other stuff's, with coming down at it's coming along the pipeline at some point. We have to start thinking about all these issues. Right.
So there are many pathways that are possible and benevolent. One of those might be, I argue, global superorganisms that use brain-to-brain communication, brain-to-brain interfaces, and the like. This is, of course, possible. And I cited this science fiction author who talks about this scenario a lot, of course, in this usual way, with a lot of conflicts and events. But he calls the event trans-enlightenment, when brain-to-brain communication and artificial, with the help of artificial units, we attain a new manner of consciousness.
Now, Charles Strauss has something like that in his book Accelerando. There's a bit where some people collect, some people offload some of their resources into the hive mind, and part of their consciousness is in the hive mind some of the time. Some people elect to join the hive mind, and that becomes like a super intelligent entity.
So
Yeah. That's a possible scenario.
It seems like that sort of thing is going to be a lot more likely than in coming decades than concerns about machine quality. I mean,
Yeah, I think it depends on how
machine
quickly
quality is
the
building a
PCI.
huge design flaw. That would be an
That is a
engineering
flaw.
marvel to even do that.
We want to do it because we want to be immortal in exactly the same luxury as the biological form, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you hit it on the head.
That's
yeah.
something we would like.
Yeah.
And if we imagine, we can't yet imagine what the experience of a world mind would be like. But I think one interpretation of singularity or the infinity point hypothesis is that we are evolving towards global superorganisms. And this depends on the bisection bandwidth of the internet, the intelligence augmentation facilities on it, so that it will be both artificial units and biological units. But once our brains have enough communication bandwidth among them, they might start merging their experiences. So a new consciousness might actually emerge. And this emergence is almost completely unpredictable.
Yeah, it really makes
we really don't know what.
It really makes me question, God, because like, okay, in the context of what we know, we're the most intelligent creatures in the universe. Hypothetically, there's a God or whatever. But like in reality, we're not that intelligent. Like we're not like I can imagine, especially if there's a multiverse, there's certainly things out there that are much more intelligent than us. And if we can give birth to something that could be, at minimum a hive mind, which would have planetary Dyson spheric, sort of energy consumption methods. Imagine what an actual, it really calls into the question of God and what is intelligence.
Well, that's
and what is consciousness,
the Mormon Transhumanist organization. That's what they believe. They believe that man's purpose is to create God, and that God is the creation of lower level intelligence. And
yeah, and in Mormonism, God is a man, and he's born of, and so it goes around like that.
Yeah, I don't know the whole detail of the theology, but that's the gist of it. As far as I can, of Mormon transhumanism.
First, science fiction probably informs us better than theology in this case and philosophy. I believe this tendency is real because every time our computing and communication bandwidth is increased throughout our history, we have become more unified culturally. It's a tendency that our nationalists and racists have been fighting against, but it's happening nonetheless. So this is going to continue because evolution favors this kind of symbiosis, I think. And I believe we should do something. We should think of policies that would enable better global cooperation using AI and decentralization technologies.
I feel like war and conflict is when something external threatens a symbiotic, a beneficial relationship. So, for example, the United States is a symbiotic entity that functions in on itself, and if something like another actor comes in to threaten it, then you have a problem, right? I think I like George Bush or whoever it was said at the United Nations, if aliens come down, we would all unite as an Earth against the aliens or whatever. I feel like we're naturally cooperative, when there's an external threat, and that's the natural tendency. But you need that counterbalancing threat, and it works up from the individual up.
Well, there's a
global threat.
Yeah.
There's global warming.
Yeah, that's a good
point.
But
there's two sides of that coin, right?
Well, I think we're becoming interdependent, so economically, and so that's another reason there's greater global cooperation and more peace now than there was, less war between state actors, and also information sharing is a big thing. You know, being able to instantly communicate with people on the other side of the world. And learn about their culture and see that they're not that different, you know, from us. That's another thing that is I think led to
the internet
has been very positive. Yeah.
Yeah, the internet has broken down barriers and is a massive empathy.
Broadening the circle of empathy and compassion to the whole world. That's what Steven Pinker talks about. And
that's something Albert Einstein said, right? So,
did he? Yeah, I'm sure he did. He was a big pacifist. So.
Right. Humanity's goal must be to broaden our compassion to fellow animals, and then perhaps beyond animals to artificial persons or things like that. I mean, like that, and that would be the transhumanism part. But humanism is very well captured by that sentiment. Now, if you think about it, our present systems are all ordained to support this highly unequal, unjust societies, and it's very unlikely that these technologies will be used in a benevolent way in terms of, you know, imperialism and whatnot. So we really have to coming to a moment of truth where we either have to choose the right thing or devolve into some pretty messy situations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. Well,
I think decentralization. Yeah, is important.
I have to go. I got a plane to catch. But hey, look, it's been a great chat.
Well.
Thanks for popping on and saying hello, Eri, and thanks Ben for, you know, and we'll get more of those people to jump in next time, Ben. You know, we'll get them in maybe next week or the week after. I'll be back in about a week, but I'll try and do some more detonation stuff while I'm away, just over the camera or whatever. But hey, thanks Eri for jumping in.
Yeah.
Welcome.
It's an honor to sit at your feet, gentlemen. Thank you.
Yeah, it was great. We learned a lot from Eri, and so we appreciate that, and looking forward to, you know, future discussions.
And thanks Dr. Dan Elton for doing the first half of the show in my absence. It was very good, and I hope you enjoyed your experience here. And thanks everybody else. Oh, Eri, I was going to ask you. I don't know. It's going to be a trick question. Who are you voting for in the USDP election?
I am not a member yet. I don't know if I can be a member after my.
All right, yeah. I forgot.
You know, like.
Yeah. All right, no. I forgot about
that. No matter who you're voting for, sign up Transhumanist.
Well, we like you, Ray. So keep
open to all internationally.
Yeah.
You'll be the founder of the Turkish one, or the Turkish Transhumanist Party or whatever, right?
Well, yeah. I actually happen to be the guy who coined the term Transhumanist Party, but the intention was not really national. I had an international vision.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, Dmitry Orlov, I think Dmitry Orlov set up Russia 2045 with the vision of going world 2045 as well. I think everybody wants to go world, and that's where we were heading by the end of that conversation. So thanks so much. Anyway, thanks everybody for coming on Detonation, and all more coming to you all this week, and thanks so much.
Sounds like your mega point is close. Thank you.
I don't know. Thanks everybody.